Now, with all of our talk about diversity, inclusion, valuing difference in the workplace, some of you out there might be saying, that's all very nice and kumbaya. Why do I care? What's the business opportunity? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's what this episode is all about. You see, in today's economy, knowledge is rapidly becoming a commodity. Each of us has more knowledge in our pockets than we can possibly use. And there are off-the-shelf solutions that will produce more data about your business than you know what to do with, and then use AI to analyze that data in ways you hadn't even imagined. Knowledge is necessary, but it's insufficient to create the nimbleness and adaptability required in today's world. Increasingly, learning is your most important organizational trait. And in a world where the pace and pervasiveness of change is going up at an exponential rate, that learning better be fast, and its application needs to be purposeful. But that sort of learning doesn't come from a leader's epiphany or a compliant, productive workforce dutifully implements. It's the result of harnessing your people's collective genius. Or as musician and producer Brian Eno says, the Scenius in your workplace. But seizing that opportunity takes leveraged, thoughtful leadership. And it starts with acts of trust. Trust your people to do important shit, because then you get important shit done. And they see that their work is important. Sure, they'll struggle at first to work with people from different backgrounds, perspectives, and status. But research shows that physical, cultural, and social barriers begin to break down when a group is brought together to develop solutions that require interdependence. They'll very quickly learn that they're playing a team game, and they need each other's thought, perspectives, and experience if they're going to win. And that is when you start to tap into the real power of the collective. Progress on things that have meaning for the business and its people. Because 25 years of research by Harvard professor Teresa Mablé has shown pretty conclusively that the most powerful motivator in the workplace is meaningful progress. It far exceeds money, reward, or promotion. And the good news is it's intrinsic motivation. They can make it for themselves without participation. The better news is, as it's being made, your business is improving in a continuous way. Still better news is, as they start to obtain it, progress that they crave, so they try to sustain it. The best news is the more progress that they make, the more genius the ideas that their progress creates. It's an upward spiral of creative connection, moving your business in a forward direction. Your people will embrace different ideas because of their own ideas. This interaction feeds. You build a workplace of meaningful inclusion where diversity is making a powerful contribution. It's an upward spiral of creative connection, moving your business towards its future aspirations. Sure, it'll be hard work at first. You're fighting the inertia of 125 years of thinkers and doers. People are going to be asked to think and do in ways they haven't been asked to before. They'll make mistakes. You'll make mistakes. But with trust and persistence, everyone will find their feet in this working environment. Then your people will begin to surprise and delight you. They'll begin to repay that trust. As a leader, you can focus on supporting and enabling the teaming you're asking them to do, giving them the systems and training that makes them effective, the organizational support that frees them up to make an even bigger difference. Your role is to accelerate and leverage progress so that over time, you create a constellation of diverse humans with different knowledge, perspectives, and solutions, orbiting your enterprise's central core of shared purpose and common goals. A team that uses the progress that it generates as perpetual energy to fuel the workplace, a crucible of learning for people of the source because they feel more valuable than a human resource. Then these happy, motivated humans that you've given the opportunity to shape the business become the engine that drive that business into an uncertain and ever-changing future. As a leader, your focus shifts yet again. You're now the navigational system that sets the distant vision, the North Star, for plotting a course into that future. Your role changes from plan and communicate to aspire and facilitate, inspire and navigate. Aspire and facilitate, inspire and navigate. It's a difference that makes you great. It's leadership that's a lever, because you're making more leaders than ever. It's leadership that's an extension of you, because the width of your band's in, all your people do aspire and facilitate, inspire, and navigate. It's a difference that makes you great. As a leader, you can greatly dare to use diversity that the others fear, because the progress that your people make is the force that you use to motivate, aspire, and facilitate, inspire, and navigate. It's a difference that makes you great. Yeah. Aspire and facilitate, inspire, and navigate. Welcome to the Difference Project, an exploration into using difference to make a difference. And in this first season, using the diversity of thoughts and ideas that comes from different backgrounds, perspectives, and lived human experience to diversify the future of work. And if today is your first show, then thanks for joining us. If you're an audience member who's coming back, well, then there's a special place in heaven for you. In this show, we want to talk about one of the opportunities, the possibilities that comes from valuing the diversity of thought and ideas in your team organization. We want to talk about cultivating collective genius. We want to talk about Scenius. If you could foster genuine curiosity and collective imagination, what innovations or breakthroughs could you create? How amazing would it be if you could consistently bring together the best of your team's knowledge and experience? What could you learn about how to better serve your customers or each other for that matter? How fast could you learn it? Now, you might be thinking, sorry, dude, that sounds great, but that won't work in my organization, on this project, in this industry, with these people. That might be true. But in this episode, we want to talk about changing your context so that it can happen. We want to encourage you to create an environment where Scenius can flourish. We want to challenge you to build different relationships in your workplace so that collective genius can develop and thrive. And with that, let's meet today's guests. And I'm going to start off with my producer, co-host, and co-conspirator, Mike Emmett. Good day, Mike. I'm choking up. Good day, Mike.
Good day, Jeff.
Another episode, my friend.
Oh yeah, COVID and all that other stuff, you know. But look, I want to kick off today by just acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on today. For you and I, Jeff, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging, and affirm our new leadership's trajectory towards affirming the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Thank you, man. Look, in our pre-production discussions, you said you were particularly excited, although uncertain about this episode's theme. Why is that?
Sure. Look, I'll be honest, I had to Google Scenius. I came across things about Brian Eno that I didn't know. And then I found a few interesting writers. One of them described the difference between Scenius and genius as like the difference between an ecosystem and an ecosystem, and I really enjoyed that concept. I think that little statement more than anything really kicked off my thinking. And then I kind of fell into this rabbit hole that raised so many questions about education and exactly where in our developing lives that we stop growing in an ecosystem and we start competing in an ecosystem. And then I pretty quickly realized that there's so much to go on here and so much to go over that much of it's actually outside the workplace boundaries that we've set for this discussion. So I'm excited also to try a little bit of a format change today, where we just have the one guest and we get to grill them and have this great discussion and let it flow. So, you know, there's already a dozen questions that I've got lined up, but I know this discussion is going to go all sorts of places. So,
cool. Well, with that, as you say, we have our one and only guest today, Dr. Jason Fox is joining us. Jason is a wizard philosopher who works with pioneering teams, venturing amidst ambiguity, complexity, and doubt. A lot of that out there these days. Good morning, Jason. Welcome to the Difference Project, my friend. Good to
Thanks,
see you.
mate. It's very good to be here. Yeah. Yeah, nice to connect. You and I have been in the same room many times at many different events, and it's always the case that, there's lots of other people and we want to catch up, and then some other person comes and interrupts the conversation. I really look forward to this chance for you and I to have a chat about something we're both interested in at depth.
Yep. Now, I suppose I should come clean and say that this theme was one that you suggested in the conversations that we were having, but it's so in line with what we're looking to explore on this show, or there at least are tangents that bounce off of it for sure. So we probably should just get stuck into the chat and not have a lot of stuff. So what is, in your mind, what is Scenius, and why do we need it?
Well, yeah. So, here's the thing. I threw the word out there. It's a useful term, but I don't want to get too caught up in I guess, the various definitions and who coined what and what there, because underneath the need for Scenius or collective genius or collective coordination or group sense making, or basically us coming together in environments that are more supportive for us to think, where we can be more enthusiastic and more encouraging, where we can entertain ambiguous, complex, paradoxical ideas, where we can stay in the tension of doubt longer. These are really vital things that I just am not seeing. So the reason I suggested Scenius, collective genius, is because I just don't see it. I'm not seeing it in most organizations. There is a dearth of quality thinking. You've got executives that are burnt out and tired, and this was the case before the pandemic, but it's just amplified things. You've got organizations where people are swamped within delusions of progress, that are busily ticking boxes and being productive, but no one really has time to think. And when they do, everyone's just so guarded and political about it that it never really seems to get to the place of genius that it could. And it's my perpetual frustration when I do a leadership offsite, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where you have executives come in, they're tired, they're busy, the agenda's jam-packed, there's hardly any time to even just hang together, let alone to have that kind of collective genius emerge. And I just see it is such a vital need. And for many years, organizations have kind of relied on external consultancies to bring in fresh thinking into the mix. But those external consultancies are full of burnt out people too. It's just it's nuts. And so anyway, so that's why I thought, yeah, let's talk about Scenius, because I know you're seeing it too, and it's a topic that needs to be on people's minds. And in the meantime, I've got my cat here who's hell bent on appearing in the show. I did have the door closed before because she was making a little bit of noise. This is Pi, everyone, and I'm going to put Pi outside. So Pi, say hello.
Hi.
Say hello. Hey. Okay. All right. I'll be right back, Jeff. Sorry.
I have a dog that actually is scratching at my door right now, so I'm just thankful he's on the other side of the microphone.
Well, I've just split them. So this is Snorri, our little Chihuahua. I don't know if you can see on screen. This yeah. So now he's in the room with me, and Pi's outside. So yeah. Anyway, sorry about that.
That'll go well, I'm sure.
The joys of virtual.
I'm just enjoying this idea that your collective genius is also
a menagerie of more than human animals. Yeah. Sorry, Jeff. I feel like you gave me the opportunity and I just unleashed as my vent. I mean, does that resonate with you? Is that what you're saying too?
Absolutely. And one of the things, often, because I do a lot of work on strategy, as you do, and often that conversation, I want to start that conversation by saying, where do you see yourself going? If you're going to have a strategy, you have to have a vision, not a tagline on your email signature, but what you see for the future of your organization. And it freaks people out. They're so consumed in the day-to-day and the problems that they're facing tomorrow that have even shifting their thinking is the hardest thing that I do with any leadership organization.
Well, yeah, I feel like I think we're quite familiar with the distinction of, having strategic offsites or whatever, or having strategy and then execution. But I think there's a precursor to strategy that a lot of people don't contemplate, and that's where Scenius comes in, or that's where another way of looking at it. I mean, I wrote the book How to Lead a Quest, and the methodology is great. People love it. It's just that people don't have time to quest. They don't even have time to think. And if they were going to embark upon the quest, most folks feel pretty isolated and alone because the Scenius or the fellowship hasn't been cultivated yet. And so it's so frustrating for me because it's a wonderful concept, and I've seen it work, and it has worked in a few organizations that have this condition in place, but most just aren't even ready to quest. And so I feel like, strategic thinking, where does the vision come from? There's a precursor to that. Is like, I mean, I asked this question at tech conferences. I asked the audience, like, how many folks read science fiction or are reading a good science fiction book right now? And it is ghastly how low the number of hands go up. And it just leaves me thinking, where are people drawing inspiration from? Where, and are we all just feeding from the same information sources? Are we all just watching the same smattering of TED Talks or whatever the algorithms on LinkedIn or wherever you get your information feed us? Like, and again, I just feel there's this vast opportunity that people can't even see yet because they're just so unaware of what the potential could be.
Yeah, yeah. And like you say, to have those conversations about a collective vision, and
It's
I
people
hesitate to
collectively
use it. You have to be a collective. You have to even be able to say, well, hey, this is what I see. How does that flange up with what you see?
Oh,
And just the relaxed
yeah.
bringing together of ideas.
I do see. I mean, let's just devil advocate ourselves. There is something on the flip side,
Yep.
and that is where you have these kind of what you mentioned in the intro, which I love, the kumbaya vibe, where everyone's sitting around, no decisions are being made, no one actually wants to take leadership. Everyone's kind of passively, politely checking in with each other, making sure it's like death by consensus, and any vision that kind of emerges from that will be so weathered down by the committees and all the processes of getting consensus for it, it'll be pretty, lukewarm milk toast at best. So I mean, there is something to be said about the spur and something coming in with creative vision to kind of spur and inspire and ignite that in others. It doesn't have to be complete uniform consensus. But with anything, there's a danger in both extremes, right? We can
Yep.
have super toxic, dictatorial, creative leaders on one side that create terrible teams where people don't feel safe or psychologically safe, and then on the other side you have this kind of stagnant passivity that means that nothing emerges or gets done.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, well, you use psychological safety, and it's come up a lot in our discussions thus far.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that think of it as that psychological safety, as we can all go in and know that I won't be challenged, or not, there'll be nothing.
Yeah,
wrong.
that's
Fine.
right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and Amy Edmondson often says it's not the end, but it's a means to the end. Psychological safety actually is what allows you to have hard conversations that people don't feel abused and shut down, that they'll actually lean into the. I hate to say that, but
Yeah.
lean into those harder conversations, and in the belief that, hey, this is all for our collective good.
And there is something to be said. So this notion of cultivating Scenius, and you think about the origins for this in the music space, in the arts, and you can look back at time in the Renaissance period where we had salons for where folks would get together and catch up for a beer or a drink or a brandy or a whiskey or whatever it is, and talk and think and debate and have enthusiastic encouragement and interest in each other's ideas. I don't see that we have that sense-making function within most organizations. And I think the reason is that it's very hard to justify from a return on investment perspective. It's not really clear. You don't have immediate, quick, measurable wins. And so what happens is most of our efforts, our attention, our focus tend to default to the things that provide the richest sense of progress. And you had tipped Professor Teresa Amabile before. And that's great that these things provide a sense of progress. The question is it meaningful progress, or are we perpetuating a delusion of progress?
Yes.
And to me, meaningful progress is that which brings us closer to future relevance. And the question of future relevance, what is going to be relevant into the future, that requires curiosity, empathy, open mind, imagination, diverse perspectives into the mix in order to answer that. And even the answers are going to be a proto-synthesis. That's like you're going to synthesize all that you can, and ideally you're doing this collectively, so you have the kind of the highest resolution sense of what the future may be, but the future is infinitely complex and dynamic and volatile and all of that stuff. But it's always going to be a proto-synthesis. It's always going to be a prototype synthesis, always impartial, always incomplete, always dynamic, and something we need to constantly update and imbue with new information and wisdom and insight as it comes to light.
Yeah. And in action, so clarity comes on the other side of action, so once again, it's
good
not
point.
just
The academic in me does like to simply consider these things without taking action. But yeah, that's probably a good point. Yes, I should think about taking action sometime. Yeah, sounds great. I've seen people do it before,
Well, but I think it's once again, it's purposeful action. It's that idea of, okay, we synthesize these things, because we believe it's going to take us where we want to go, and let's put some things in place. Let's run some experiments. Let's test some hypotheses.
Yeah, and I just feel like the structure, there's a bigger thing at play here. Most organizations are hobbled at the core of their operating system by perverse incentivization that rewards myopic, short-sighted behavior. So what I mean by this is you can have incredible visions of what is possible within an organization, but for many folks, it would be career limiting to actually invest effort into that, because it will take them away from what they're actually getting paid to do or what their scorecards and metrics are. So it takes quite a level of combination of psychological maturity, as in the ability to there's a hierarchical complexity. You need to be able to you need to have a metasystemic or paradigmatic level of thinking in order to see the system, in order to be able to navigate through it. In addition to that, you also need to have a level of social maturity. You need to kind of be comfortable in who you are, because if you're operating outside of the system, that can set you up as a pariah and make it kind of difficult for some bonds to be maintained. And then the third thing is that you kind of need to have some life stage maturity. If things aren't good at home and you're still kind of struggling to make ends meet, it's going to be really tricky to kind of be operating in this space. And I loathe how it kind of therefore tends to skew things towards those that are in a fairly privileged position to do this. And so part of the work with anyone that does have privilege is removing the barriers for others, so that we have more people in this ability to think and act like this.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the questions that comes to mind is this even possible? Is Scenius, to use the term, even possible in the modern organizational context? Or does it take a new context to?
That's a good question.
If it's even, once again, if it's even possible to be intentional in cultivating it.
Well, yes. So, the question, is it possible, as a binary? So, yes, of course it's possible. This is,
Yeah.
but the path to get there is going to be interesting. And so what I see it happening right now in Web3 and in decentralized autonomous organizations, I see it happening where you have power and decision-making authority and wealth distribution is distributed rather than centralized. This doesn't mean that it's completely distributed. There are still hierarchical natures, so there's hierarchies that emerge and fall. But we are in a domain where there's experimentations that are happening with blockchain. It's much more transparent, and you can kind of see the mistakes much more readily too. The way I liken it is it's almost, we're in the space in the kind of early stages of what it might have been like during the Bronze Age collapse. And by that is, we had empires that were vast and wondrous and so on, and then they kind of disappeared. But in that liminal space after the collapse, all sorts of experimentation was happening with different ways of governance in Athens or Greece or all different places, and in amongst that diverse experimentation, turmoil, liminal ambiguity, complexity, all of that stuff, things emerged. And right now we are in the messy liminal space of what it means to organize collectively, because most of the challenges that we face as a species are transnational in their nature. So they're complex hyper objects like climate change or refugee crisis or food or things like that. And so there is a need for us to be able to coordinate at a transnational level, so beyond national boundaries. Multinational organizations do have this capacity, but they're kind of hobbled by a traditional industrial era organizational structures that tend to be fairly hierarchical and fairly linear and fairly siloed and centralized.
Yeah.
And so the experimentations happening right now with Web3 and blockchain and all of that stuff are messy, and there's lots of things that don't work, but it's the right direction of experimentation. And of course, there are other more traditional. We've seen holacracy and other things of distributing ownership and so on. There's something beautiful in the kind of the founder startup phase where they don't actually have enshrined rules that they have to follow, and there's ways for progress to be made. But then inevitably, and not everyone could be pioneers, not everyone could be scouts, explorers, and pioneers. Some folks do need to settle, and part of the process of, settling a place is creating the rules, systems, templates, guidelines, and provide a sense of order, and that provides good scaffolding for folks to work within. So it's not that everyone needs to be working in this way, but I do feel like more of us should.
Yes. Well, and I think the more that do, the more you create that scaffolding, the more you create at least structure that's less structured around
Yes.
the great organizational machine,
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, I mean, and you use the word machine there, and this is something I seek to eradicate as much as possible. And most of our thinking, and it is very much in most conferences, most organizational speak is very much architecturally skewed. So people will talk about, or engineering skewed. We'll treat the organization as though it were a machine. And this is a very Western reductive approach to complex systems, which tends to see a complex system as a complicated system. So the example here is like, if you have a photocopier is a complicated system. If it's not working, there's usually a problem. You can find what it is, fix it, and then you're done. An organization, a person, a team, they're complex systems. The relationships between the components are non-linear. There's no singular fix, and often the attempts to come in and fix a complex system end up having iatrogenic or unintended consequences. So it ends up sometimes causing harm to the system. So therefore, the kind of disposition that we ought to be taking in this new world we find ourselves is much more of as a gardener, or as a way of relating to systems as though they were living. There are things that can be cultivated and tended and nurtured too, but things are going to emerge, and it's not always going to be what we expect. And sometimes it's going to be good things, and we want to be able to have the nimbleness to run with that. But sometimes it's going to be things that we don't want. Like if a bunch of weeds happen in your garden that are choking the life out of the other plants that you want to kind of remove some of the weeds. So that kind of nimble, fluid, metacognitive disposition where we're thinking and feeling and being part of the system, but we have the reflexive and reflective ability to kind of see the patterns and tend to this complex emergent system. That's kind of what we need to skew more to. And it's a philosophy that's yet to permeate widely into much of enterprise land, at least as what I see.
Yeah, I'm the same, and it's so funny. I actually do say exactly the same thing when I'm talking about culture. People often talk about culture like it's something that you construct and then you dictate the use of, and I say no. The best thing you can do in quote unquote leading a culture is to create an environment where the right sort of culture develops and thrives. And then and then be attentive as a leader to, like you say, nurture, pull out the weeds, feed, feed
And
it.
the sense of what is the right culture may also change as
Hmm.
time progresses. So there's like you say, be attuned. Speaking of tune, like the other example I'm sure you use is a distinction between classical and trained musicians, music, and jazz.
Mhm.
So this is not to say that classical music is bad. Let's get rid of it. It's wonderful. We love it, and it's wonderful to honor the classics and so on. But there's a different disposition that a jazz musician might have to a classically trained musician. Classically trained musician was what we'll be looking for the kind of the notes to play from, and the conductor to kind of lead, and there's a lot of precision involved there. A jazz musician will read the vibe, will read the cues, will adapt and respond. And I mean, I'm not a musician here, so I'm just I mean, I've got a drum kit behind me, but that's more my therapeutic release from too much time thinking in my head. So, I mean, am I on the point? Is that a fair
Yeah, yeah,
analogy there?
absolutely. Well, Miles Davis said there's no wrong note. There's only the right note to play next. And
Mm.
and that, so it's and once again, classical musicians will, generally speaking, the notes are in front of me on a sheet of paper, and my goal is to play them perfectly. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
And that is wonderful. I don't want to besmirch classical musicians. It's wonderful and incredibly technical. But as an analogy for enterprise land, another thing is it's kind of like when people use they get Olympians in to talk about goal setting. And again, I love Olympians and what they do is incredible. But goal setting works incredibly well for formulaic work with predictable environments and outcomes.
Mhm.
So training for the Olympics, it makes sense because the environment's kept exactly the same for your sporting, whatever it is. In enterprise land, everything's changing. Like
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
so we don't want to have the kind of narrow, fixated goal focus that helps an Olympian in enterprise life, because it might just blind us for the many myriad opportunities around us.
And I won't go there too deeply, but we've just seen a manifestation of that over the last 2.5 years. Suddenly the goalposts were moved a very long way from where they once were, and the field was turned upside down and on its end. And okay, how do you continue to play the game we've all been trained to play in that sort of environment? And mostly you panic.
Yeah,
Yes.
and my favorite quote of the last couple of years, and I really should look it up because I keep forgetting who said it, is that momentum inhibits reinvention.
Mm.
Momentum inhibits reinvention. And I feel like, yeah, we had a heap of momentum, and then pandemic came. Now we potentially have the opportunity to question the narratives that are and the systems that we've been slave to, and ask ourselves, is there a better way? And if
Mm.
we're asking ourselves, is there a better way? I mean, this I'm going back into quest territory now. The defaults that we do, our defaults are the options we choose automatically in the absence of viable alternatives. Our quests are the search for viable alternative options to the default ways of doing things. So how do we quest then? We need to cultivate strategic initiatives, alternative options that may be deployed and may be viable, which if we experiment with. But where do we find these options? And this is usually where people struggle is, and maybe busy executives might organize a strategic offsite where they all arrive overworked and kind of exhausted and burnt out and tired, and they're stealth checking their emails throughout the whole thing, and they have some speaker come in who will show them YouTube clips and use tired old analogies of Uber and Airbnb, and they'll choose some AI robot from the future, and then they will be left to do some sort of half-assed brainstorm about what they could come up with, and then they'd end up with these lukewarm ideas because they hadn't had the time to actually percolate or stay in the mix. And you can hear my facetiousness with this.
Oh, I
An
know.
alternative, yeah, an alternative reality is, I mean, I miss when we used to have rituals where we go to the pub once a week and would talk or hang or have a long lunch once a week or have book clubs or just have ways to connect and rally together around broadening our intellectual minds landscape to kind of engage in shared exploration, experimentation, imagination. Like this is the lack right now, and it's something we can foster.
Yeah, and exactly. So I love that idea of communal rituals, because I mean
Mm.
for forever, that's what's brought us together. That's what's allowed communities to
What's one of
thrive.
your personal rituals that you love? Like, what's something that has in times gone by, what's something that you're like, "Oh, I really," and of course, the last
Oh,
couple of years may have disrupted things, but what's one of the
yeah.
things that
Uh,
really works for you?
Probably the best ritual for me in sort of modern times is a jam session.
Oh,
Just
really?
yeah,
Oh, great.
just sitting down with guitars and violin and
Nice,
two folks
nice.
that just will sing even though they can't sing. I mean, everybody can sing, but
That's nice.
it's a spectrum. But just there's something about that where
That's great. Yeah.
there's it's a thing that you're talking about. You come into it with this trepidation, and I have to be good, and I have to star in the room, and then you realize nobody's a star in this room, and we're all only going to be as good as we make each other, and that's yeah. I love a really good jam session, even if it's
Yeah.
not great music. You know,
Oh, here we go.
Jeff,
Apologies.
you've raised a question, and I think it's a good one because you had this idea of thinking collectively. What's the difference between Scenius and groupthink?
Good question.
Good question. Is Go, Jace. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say.
My instinctual answer, without thinking about it too much, is that groupthink optimizes towards collective coherence, as in, sorry, groupthink optimizes to collapse to a singular solution. So what the group is doing is looking to cohere. So this is where you get echo chambers, I mean, there's all sorts of power dynamics at play here, but if enough of the key folks signal thinking in a particular direction, the rest of the group gets on, and thus the group is safe and everyone is, no one can be singled out. Scenius, the collective genius, is a little bit different because you'll want, like, there's enough comfort in terms of the group and each person feeling as though they belong and that they are respected, and that they are surrounded by peers that are enthusiastic and encouraging, which means that they can bring a diversity of ideas and the group itself might not agree. And frequently we won't agree. And there won't be any coherence or, that's what I meant to say. Groupthink it optimizes for consensus, and Scenius optimizes for kind of collective sense making or broadening of the landscape of possibility.
Mm.
And so Scenius will create a richer and more vibrant, diverse and varied and potentially confusing and confounding thought space. And groupthink will have something that's rendered or collapsed into something that's flat and simple and safe and readily understood by every member in the group.
And yeah, I immediately went to sort of the social dynamic that sits around those two things, and whereas groupthink, the social dynamic is like, as you say, that consensus. I'm part of the group if I agree with the group.
Yes, yes.
Where Scenius is that a social dynamic where I'm part of the group if I'm finding new things to bring to the group. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I mean, suddenly the norm that you're working with in terms of feeling a sense of belonging is very, very different. I'm belonging if I'm in lockstep with everybody else. I'm belonging, and if I'm actually, hey, hold on a second, I got a better, different idea to add to this thing.
So there was a follow-up question, and part of it was in a little bit of pre-reading of people who are writing about Eno, mostly, not so much Eno himself, but how much of the idea of Scenius requires the abandonment of ego to
I have thoughts, but do you want to go first this time, Jeff?
Look, I mean, my original thought is nobody abandons ego. It's always there.
Sorry.
And I think it's the way you manifest itself is the differentiator, I suppose. If you can have an ego that says I have a good idea and it's one that's worthy of being heard, but not an ego that demands it be heard over everybody else's, then you are fostering the right sort of environment. But if your ego is, I want to be right
Yeah.
at any cost, then it's.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Like the ego question, it comes up a bit. The two things here. Marshall Rosenberg, the author of nonviolent communication, pioneer of nonviolent communication, he says that there are two games that we can play in life. The first is the game of who's right. It's the game in which everyone loses, and the second is the game of making life wonderful. And there is something about Scenius that is about more. It's less about being right and more about participating in the infinite play of continuing the play and expanding the horizons of possibility. So ego itself, I mean, another thing, Jeff, you mentioned resonates with what Tyson Yungerporter, the author of Sand Talk, says in a lot of indigenous, well, at the core of indigenous knowledge systems is the inherent or implicit awareness of not being narcissistic to the point where you believe you're greater than thou, you're greater than others in the kind of in the group you're with. And so the important thing is, like, do we abandon ego? I'm not really sure that we can. I'm not sure that we'd be very interesting as a person if we did. But I do think that Scenius does require self-awareness, and it requires that. I mean, there's an ebb and flow to all of these things, but I had a good point. It's just gone. But anyway, but yes, no, I don't think it's about abandoning ego. And I think that a lot of the time when people think that they've abandoned ego, it's their ego saying, "Look at me, I've abandoned my ego."
So,
And so
as like the thought that just popped into my mind was that if it requires self-reflection, and our recruitment policies and our HR and everything inherently, is geared towards recruiting narcissists, essentially.
yes,
People who are, we don't recruit for self-reflection. Like, we don't build organizations for self-reflection. So
no.
there's a lot of work to do.
There is, and Venkatesh Rao, one of my favorite thinkers, you can find over at Ribbon Farm, wrote a while ago the notion of the Gervais principle, which is based upon the original UK Office series, where he talks about effectively you've got narcissists, sociopaths, or psychopaths, who are the ones that are orientated to rise within these systems, because it does tend to favor a kind of an unfeeling commitment to goals. I mean, yeah, I think we do have a fair bit of work to go, and I think that a lot of the issues here are a nature of the games that we are playing. That are, the rules of the game, the implicit in incentive structures, and how power works within these complex systems does tend to favor arseholes and pricks rising to the top. Which I should point out that a lot of my clients are really lovely, and it is possible to kind of play. It is possible to ascend without having to, compromise your own self in the process. And it's just that those folks tend to feel a little jaded and a little isolated and lonely at the top, and hence why we need seniors.
Yes, and I think one of the things that I've observed where I have seen these teams, we'll say it that way, because they don't tend to, in my experience, they haven't tended to be entire organizations, but teams that actually have cultivated this world where they're getting ongoing contribution from their people in a way that's driving their business forward. Is it that leader that allows himself to let go, to start to trust his people, to bring good ideas, is the one that gets that trust repaid, because they suddenly say, okay, I'm not being set up here. It's not like pull, boom, it's okay. I really want to hear your ideas. And oh, by the way, not only do I want to hear those ideas, if they're good enough, I want you to help me do something with them, turn them into an operational reality. And so you don't have to hold on to they don't hold on to that sort of pricks and assholes mentality once they see that everyone thrives, that they actually thrive as a leader, and so they do all the things that leaders want to do in terms of moving up the organization.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that would be my hope. I think that a lot of potentially a lot of people in senior positions of power and influence are overdue for an existential crisis. And when they do have it, that's a good thing. And at the same time, there are folks that have actually risen to positions of power and have had their own kind of flirtations with existential angst and realize that, oh, the me who got me here is not who I am now.
Mm,
And, you know, part of what I need to do is dismantle the very power structures that got me into this position in the first place. And part of my role here is to create an environment where, um, I mean, I don't really I believe in the ideal or the directional um, notion of meritocracy. I don't believe it actually exists in most cases because there's all sorts of subjective biases and all sorts of constraints that get in the way. But the orientation towards creating environments where merit can surface regardless of other factors is mostly a noble one. But yeah, this stuff is complex. And mentioned before, this notion of reflection. It's something that we need. It's something we want to cultivate in all of us.
yeah. And look, I think one of the things, because I agree with everything you're saying about meritocracy, but I think there's also in looking to create an environment, at least, that meritocracy has a big role. I think there's some beneficial side effects. You actually start to give people an opportunity to feel valuable in their contribution, to feel that they're in an environment where their contribution matters, and that has, I think, intrinsic value to people in the workplace, that all the things that we say
Yes.
we want to do, that it
Yeah.
engages them and gives them positive inner work life experiences that they take home to their families, and that they share with the people around them, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and it's nice if these don't have to be wordsmithed by corporate branding teams. If if people can actually value the work that they do because they can see that this does contribute to some sort of meaningful progress, and I kind of like my team and I like the people that I work with, and showing up to work and doing this is good because I spend a good portion of my life working with these people. If you can create an environment where people like doing what they do and they like the people that they're working with, that's you're doing most of the work anyway.
Yeah, that's and I think out of that, that's when when you can start to, that's that precursor you were talking about at the very beginning. I
Yes,
actually like
fellowship.
working with my leadership team. So now when we come into a room to start banging around ideas, that's going to be fun, not something that's getting in the way of me answering all those emails that are piling up in my inbox.
Yeah.
Um, so
So we've got just quite a practical question to round it up, because we are getting close to the top of the hour. The question is, how do you lay the groundwork for Scenius, collective genius, to thrive?
Let's for mine, it's like how do we tend to the soil for seniors to emerge. I'll come back to something that Jeff talked about before. Ritual is really important. I consider rituals to be sacred routines where we deliberately carve out time against the grain of busyness and default thinking in order to progress the things that matter. And so, what this might take the form of is a book club, a long lunch, or a hang that has a regular cadence. And when people arrive, most of the tenets of, I think it's Nancy Klein, the components of a thinking environment are there. So there's a sense of ease, there's equality, there's mutual encouragement, appreciation, all of those things. And for most folks, we actually need to spend some quality time hanging together. We need to cultivate that, and this is why offsites and leadership retreats and things like that are really important, or even just as friends. I mean, through the pandemic, when it first started, one of the first things I did is I created a Discord server and I rallied together a bunch of complexity practitioners and philosopher poets. And we had a regular thing once a week of listening to a podcast or reading an article about what's going on, and then collectively getting together on a virtual call to share our thoughts, our reactions, our response, and to kind of collectively sense make together. And in that process, we also check in with each other. How are things going? And we had the Discord forum in between as a way to kind of keep in touch with the connective tissue between our live virtual sessions. And that went on for more than a year, and it was such a beautiful way of cultivating Scenius and benefiting from the sense making that it can bring. So I guess that laying the groundwork would be, let's create a ritual. Let's actually carve out some time in the calendar. And then when we do have that time, let's not corrupt that. Let's actually create these environments where we can connect, where there is a sense of fellowship and ease, and where the potential for friendship can be cultivated. And then with that context, let's start introducing the provocations, because it's not simply a social club, as in we're not just there to have a good time. We want to have psychological safety that's been naturally cultivated and developed. We want to trust each other. And then we also want to kind of rally around particular topics. And this is where we might have a rotating thing where different people might nominate something that say, hey, I really think that we need to, I heard Dr. Fox talk about Web3 and blockchain. I thought it was all just bullshit and scams, but maybe we should actually look at this, and maybe let's get together and have a session on this. And then someone's like, oh yeah, you also mentioned blah, or Jeff mentioned this. Let's actually do a little bit of a session on this. And then over time, you get this thing of enough of a provocation, people bringing in their sense-making faculties together, collectively jamming, and like a jam session, like an intellectual jam session. And then things emerge, like insights emerge. You have revelations, you have insight cascades, you have that, like, it literally cultivates wit. Wit is associative knowledge. And if you have bright-minded friends that you can actually share and make sense of the world around you with, your wit increases because you have more vantage points with which to see things. You have more disparate sources of knowledge to synthesize together. And it's hard to put, it's hard to kind of describe the impact that will have, and the quality of the thinking, the decision making, and the way that you go about the projects that you embark upon, but also the things that you create and bring into the world that wouldn't have existed beforehand without such a state. So that's kind of how I would start it, how I'd go about tending the groundwork for Scenius.
And look, I've had, very similar experiences on working in the construction project environment, where we actually are looking to decentralize planning and control. So start to make the people that actually do the work responsible for planning and controlling their own work, so that you start out with this thing that is very, very regimented. Okay, we're going to have these meetings on these days, and here's the agenda. This is what we're going to talk about. But what you find, and it took me a while to actually make this mental shift, is that it is exactly that ground that you're cultivating. You're setting it up where suddenly the barriers break down, where the silos between designers and constructors and senior managers melt away, and you start having these conversations. Well, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what we experienced on this particular job, and here's this great idea where we can bring together with that idea. Well, I could design a thing like this that would allow us to do that. And so you create, and you use the term friendship. You create these bonds that perhaps don't extend. They don't necessarily go and have beers together after work, but there's this mutual respect, this bond that occurs, that suddenly everybody understands. Well, I have a place to play here, and that you could call a friendship, but may not be our traditional view of that. But yeah, it's that shift from, okay, we're here to have a meeting. Here's the agenda. Let's do our thing. To no, we're actually here to have a conversation. The agenda is just a way of there to help us move through the conversation.
Yeah, the kind of the philosopher poet in me loves for folks to have us cultivate a sense of being construct aware. And most of work is full of construct roles, titles, positions, policies, procedures. They're all constructs that have been created. They're illusions. We don't have to subscribe to them. But if we choose to, let's do so willingly because it serves some sort of purpose. And so the more I can kind of like have people see through the illusions, the facades, and all of that, and relate to each other horizontally as people, and then realize, hey, yeah, we've all got our role to play in this kind of bigger game that we're sharing. So let's do that well. That may cultivate the friendship, fellowship, the Scenius that then actually turns work into a space that one might even say is like inspiring. One might even consider to be meaningful at times, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. There's a concept that in organizational psychology called burstiness. Are you familiar with burstiness?
No, I haven't heard burstiness.
Okay, so I think it was an Adam Grant podcast, and they were talking to the writers from Trevor Noah's writer room, and they would talk about their creative process and how as they would start to write for a show, that all of a sudden it would gain this momentum. Whereas people would start to finish other people's jokes, and Adam Grant says, well, that's a phenomenon that is actually a manifestation of a highly creative environment that organizational psychologists call burstiness. And it's that you suddenly get this burst of ideas building on one another. And literally I've been in planning sessions with construction people, believe it or not, where suddenly this burstiness starts to happen. It even gets noisy, so it rises, the sound in the room rises to this incredible level where not people screaming at each other, but oh, hey there, and there's fun. You can viscerally feel the energy in the room when you start to have that sort of bursty feeling.
And all of the things that go into tending to creating conditions for that burstiness to manifest, it will come down to the layout, the lighting, how people have connected, the kind of curmudgeonly person at the beginning of the day somehow being warmed up by actually being seen and appreciated, of all of those subtle dynamics that facilitators are mostly, but not fully, but mostly attuned to. And then it collectively, it just, complexity scientists might call it a phase shift. Like you actually go into a higher order of complexity and cohesion. And it's a marvel to witness this emerge.
Yes.
It's so exciting.
Well, we probably should start to wrap up. It's a tremendous session. I could go on.
I love it.
So, Mike, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Wow. Like I imagined this would be, it touches on so many non-workplace areas of life, as well as, the obvious applicability to workplace within this discussion. So, I've got a lot more reading to do, Jeff. Thanks so much, Jason.
Yeah, it's such a joy. Thanks, Jeff, for arranging this.
Sure. Any final thoughts you want to share with us?
I'll end with a quote that I end pretty much all of my presentations with. It comes from James Carse, the author of Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life as Play and Possibility, and a pioneer in this kind of more garden-like thinking. He says, only that which can change can continue. And I think this is the disposition that all of us need to cultivate if we are looking to bring about Scenius in our own lives and those around us. Only that which can change can continue. We must stay attuned to the current of our times, the currents of our times. And, where possible, cultivate, encourage, be warm, be generous, lead with a curiosity and empathy that we want to see in others. And then collectively, we might co-create a world more curious and kind.
Cool. Thank you. Well, Jason, thank you very much for being with us. I really do appreciate you joining us. As I said, this has been a tremendous discussion. And as always, Mike, thank you for your wonderful work on the board, as it were. And of all, thank you very much to the people that have tuned in, whether it's live or the recorded version. We really appreciate your time and attention. We know it's quite valuable and we don't take it for granted. So join us for our next episode, which will be on the 7th of July, and where we'll talk a little bit about what does flexibility really look like in the workplace beyond just how many days a week do we spend in the office. Until then, thank you very much, and goodbye from the Difference Project.